Good morning. In this session, we are going to continue from where we had left in the earlier session. That would be about expanding on what Mamet said. As a quote, look at the genesis of how cinematic story unfolds. So the somebody who wants something and has trouble getting it becomes, a framework for us to look at how cinematic stories evolve from time to time. So we are going to look at individual characteristics and see and or expand on how they speak or what they have to offer in terms of their life journey. So the somebody gives us a character. The somebody is always referential to a character. It's not just a name, but a person in a specific place, a specific time, living a specific life. So whenever you're developing characters, you are writing about somebody. That somebody is your character. Okay, that somebody has to be placed in a physical space and time, and that somebody or your character must be living a specific life. So it's very important for you to develop um, the specificity of his or her life, what they do, um, research about the background of this person. You might not be expanding on the background in the cinema, in the story, but you might be um, using some of the nuggets from his or her life or in the past that could have specific meanings or could help you in the evolution of the story. Okay, so identifying which place this character is located, or in what time this character is living his or her life, and what kind of a life you want to give to that character is extremely crucial. Once you have decided on that sort of a framework, you would have a solid character on hand. Then the character must have some sort of a want. You know, how do we look at want? The want part is always associated with the goal. For the movement of a story from stage A to stage B, when you have already introduced the characters in the exposition part, now next part is the movement. Okay, so the character must have something to want, or that gives us a goal or the story question that will be about what this film is all about. Okay, so the film is the film about the journey of a character, um, a physical journey of a character, or an internal journey of a character, and everybody wants something other in life. Similarly, your character must have a desire, must have a goal. So sometimes this is an opportunity to do something that the character wants, like I said, to travel, to climb a mountain, who the person of their dreams, so on. Okay. um, Several films are about this sort of movements. Okay, unless there is movement in the character, the story is getting stagnant. Understand that. And sometimes it's the dilemma forced into the character. How do we spell that out? How do we speak about the dilemma part? It's largely about the internalization of what is happening across uh, the character in the society or in the story that force the character to think, and that sort of a thinking process would have some sort of conflicting reflection. So depending on that, what could be the possible examples to free the alien invasion? Okay, if aliens have invaded the city, then how would the character come out of that, or escape the stalker, or survive a tsunami? Depending on the kind of scale of the conflict, depending on the scale of the obstacle, the character is going to be in a situation where he or she would be forced to think in a certain way. And many a times it could be a catch-22 situation, or it could be a situation where the characters is not being able to decide what, how to proceed, or which way to move ahead. So it might be largely internal. For example, in a story built around a character battling grief, because grief is something that is universal in nature. All of us understand that. But how do you um, speak about that grief? How do you kind of cinematically show or write about that grief? It's not a novel where you can say that the character is sad and your readers are going to understand that. Here you are largely developing a story which would get a cinematic representations, and you would have audience to view. So how are you going to show grief in terms of writing? So your character battling grief will be reflective of the internal journey of the character. So this sort of a want to get out of the grieving situation, or why the character has landed up in that grieving situation gives us an idea about the goal or the story question. Then the character must have some sort of a trouble in getting it, which means it gives us the conflict, core conflict, or it gives us a glimpse into the obstacle part. It provides obstacle that the character must overcome to achieve their goal. So there is the character, there is the goal, and in between what you see is the character trying to overcome all the obstacles or conflicts that will come along the way um, while achieving that goal or whatever he or she wants to get. What is the difficulty that he or she is encountering while trying to get it. These obstacles will ask difficult questions and the response will come to change and define the characters. So as a writer, it's the onus is on you to raise those questions, and something that we also confront or encounter on an everyday basis. Okay. We all have dreams and desires, and then we try to fulfill them. In the process, what happens is we come across several hurdles, and then we make a note or a mental note of those obstacles and see how do we overcome that. Sometimes it is financial, sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's just conflicting in terms of giving you some sort of an internal dilemmatic situation, whether it could be confusion, it could be some sort of a self assessment which needs to be done. So all the responses that you would get to answer, all the responses you need to put forward while looking at the difficult questions would give you an entire picture about what this conflict is and how do we overcome this conflict. So when you put these elements together, these three elements together, somebody wanting something and has trouble getting it, then you would have, outline of basic storyline. We often use this approach to create a movie log line or one sentence synopsis. Understand that a log line is basically a one sentence synopsis which gives you an idea about what this story is all about. So writing good log lines are extremely important because that is reflective of the clarity that you have regarding the story you want to tell. So it is crucial how you are taking that forward. To this, I want to add one more question. What's great about it? Okay, everybody wants to write stories and become famous and explore the avenues that are there in screenwriting. So unless you create something that is exciting, something that is intriguing about that narrative, why would the audience or why would a screen reader be interested in reading? If you want to sell cinematic screenplays and you want to be in a situation where it is crucial for you to move forward in your career, then it is you need to keep these questions in mind, that what is so great about my story or what is so exciting or intriguing about my story. Is there a novelty factor? Is there something that I'm offering which is extremely new, or in terms of treatment, in terms of how I'm going to tell the story or the characters, um, the material, the cinematic material that you are trying to develop, or the writing material that you're trying to develop, is it compelling enough for the readers or the viewers? So, or is it to you at the first place? Because you are your first audience, you are your first reader, you are the one who's trying to develop it. So you must have some sort of a logical response to this as to how do you go defining what's great about the story. I think that's a good place to start, to begin with. And you can keep this simple, trying to look at characters, trying to look at what's their dreams, goals, and desires are, and then looking at what sort of conflicts or problems or obstacles they would encounter while trying to achieve those goals. Then let's look at cinematic stories. In a film, it is not enough to be a storyteller. Okay, in a novel, you might get by while just telling that, okay, I'm the storyteller and I have the story to tell, which is what we have been discussing so far, that it is extremely crucial that you need to have a desire to tell stories, but it is not enough if you want to develop cinema or work in the sector of cinema while working in the pre-production part, which would be largely around developing a screenplay, that if you are just a storyteller, um, it might not work. So you have to be a story shower. Now, what is the difference between a storyteller and a story shower? A story shower is somebody who visualizes or who is a story visualizer, somebody who can see the story come along. So, and this is something that you have to show because audiences are not going to read, in a fundamental sense, audiences are not going to read, they're going to view. So, can you show your story instead of telling your story? You are telling your story. So, at a foundational level, what you are trying to do is you are trying to tell a story. But when it comes to the technical aspect of it, of writing, you are essentially engaging in the business of story showing or story visualizing. So you need to tell stories which are cinematic in nature. How do we tell stories which are cinematic in nature? By integrating cinematic elements, by keeping this in mind that you can develop stories which has some sort of a cinematic treatment, or you are developing a cinematic narrative. So first seeing what you want to tell and then showing the same thing and looking for logical drops which would help you visualize the story and which would be helpful in showing the story to the public. And in filmmaking, story and film are often projected separately. Most of the times this happens. Screenwriters are housed in one building, production people in another. Is something that happened in the context of the West. Here, many times because of budget constraints, or if we are working on smaller projects, you might have one, one big room where everybody's placed and they have this healthy discussion that happens. But in West, many times it so happens that things are kept formal, and in the process, what happens is uh, the filmmaking part and the story making part happens separately. Unintentionally, a divide is created whereas there should be a bond between the technical people, technical personnel, those people who are working. Whereas in the case of waste, what happens is technical tools become separated in their own end, and those people who are engaged in the process of developing the story, they might work separately. So this sort of an isolation is not healthy. So, while developing, do remember that your narrative is also going to go through a lot of changes, um, unless you are writing for yourself, which happens in case of many first-time filmmakers, that they take up their own stories and they see to it through the end. Um, if you are a professional screenwriter and you are writing for somebody else, know for a fact that once you have given the material to the director or to the producer, and it has been greenlit, many a times your job might end there. So feeling bad that okay, they took my story, but they didn't bring it to the desirable end how you visualized, uh, might bring you some sort of conflict. So understand that it's a industrial enterprise and there are things that are kept in mind while taking a certain story to develop. And cinematic stories attempt to bridge that gap to show how camera work, lighting, screen direction, music have profound implications on both the story as well as the characters. Now, otherwise it would have been a novel. Otherwise, it just have been a story on, a printed page. So the transition that happens from a printed page to the last screen, it happens where the characters come alive or the story comes alive. It happens because there are so many technical, associations that happen. Okay, your camera work can create magic, the lighting can create magic or escalate the power of the character. How a director is taking this narrative forward with his directorial treatment, or how music is adding so much of layers to the narrative. Those things come alive, the story comes alive. There are hundreds of ways of conveying ideas in the movie. Like dialogue is one of them. Dialogue is a very crucial aspect of writing. So we require specific dialogue writers many times in order to develop screenplays. After multiple drafts, many times dialogue writer comes in and he or she takes the story to another level because they have internalized the narrative and they realize the potential of the story and how the characters are going to converse or interact, or in what situations, what kind of dialogue would best fit, give them the audience a better idea about the movement of the characters. Then there is a language going on beneath the surface of everything. That language is something that gives us an idea about the subtext. Every shot, inference is reaching deep into the way of the audience perceives the world, how the audience interprets or understands that world or the universe that you are trying to project. Um, in each and every scene, write it in such a way that layering happens. You know, um, you might not make everything very obvious while writing. Sometimes that subtextual layering adds extreme value to your story, and it can be considered as smart writing or intelligent writing or things that could be picked up because as a narrative it becomes compelling before it goes on to into the making of the um, film. Part of becoming a good director is knowing why you are making the decisions you're making and knowing how they're going to affect your audience and your story. So if you are a screenwriter turned director, or if you are aspiring to, direct the film that you've written, know that every decision that you make regarding a certain scene is going to impact or have some sort of influence in the larger context when it comes to decision making, when it comes to um, reception of the audience. So how the audience are going to receive your stories, how they're going to look at the narrative, whether they're going to accept or reject, all those things will depend on the director. That's why the director is also called the author of the film. Author is a French term that is used um, instead of writer. So what is proposed as a theory, there's a theory um, called author theory, and what theory proposes is that after the screenwriter is done with the material, when the director takes that written material and tries to convert that into a cinematic story, he or she is rewriting. So direction becomes a process of rewriting that story on screen. So they become the author of the film. So author would be loosely translated to author. So they become the director plays a significant role in the authorship. So that's more or less about cinematic stories that I wanted to talk about in terms of forms and structures, and that brings us to an end to this topic. I'll stop here and we'll proceed to the next topic in the next session. Thank you.